G'day and welcome back to the shed. Tonight I want to take a look at Robert Silverberg's Nightwings. Now this is a novel that is referred to in the science fiction industry as a fix-up novel. Now that term was coined by A.E. Van Vogt himself, who had several fix-up novels in his repertoire. What a fix-up novel is basically when an author has pre-released or previously released a novella or a short story as an independent work, and then later on added additional short stories or stitched up several short stories together to form a novel. And sometimes they need to fix up that storyline to ensure that it runs smoothly, that it's coherent as you'd expect a novel to be. And Nightwings is just one of those classic stitch-up novels. So I want to start tonight by giving you a full rundown of Nightwings because I think it's one of Robert Silverberg's great novels. Give you a bit of a history of that novel, a bit of a plot overview, what I liked, what I didn't like, and some recommendations. Then I will also talk to some other fix-up novels that I have in my current collection as I'm rebuilding it, that I've read in the past that I highly recommend as well. So I hope you stick around for the full review. So Robert Silverberg released Nightwings as a novella format in 1969, and he won the Hugo Award that year for the best novella. And he was also nominated for the Nebula for the best novella that year as well. So following that success, Robert Silverberg released another two short stories, one called Paris Way in 1968 and the one to Jerusalem in 1969, both which were set in this world that we first get introduced to in Nightwings. So what we find in Robert Silverberg's Nightwings is that the world is set in a distant future. It's something like 30 to 40,000 years in the future. And there's been no real records kept, so even the narrator, who's this guy called a Watcher, can't really tell how far into the future we are from our current first cycle. So what we find in this distant future is that humanity is pretty much pigeonholed into different castes or different guilds, if you like. And we're met and introduced to one of those guildsmen in a Watcher. I was nearly going to say his name, but I'm not going to say his name because that gets revealed later on in the novel, and I'll leave that to you to read the book to get his full name. But we're introduced to the main protagonist in this Watcher, and this guild is responsible to look at basically this box, this equipment that they have. They almost go into this trance-like state, and they sort of investigate and monitor the stars for an impeding invasion from these invaders. So this Watcher is traveling with another two people. One of them is called Avlula, who's of the caste of Flyers. And these Flyers are genetically modified humans who have these special wings. So they're very, very dainty, very thin people who have got these special wings that can actually fly. And these wings can't deal with the sun because of all the different turbulences in the air during daylight, so they can only fly at night, hence the title for the novella and the novel itself in Nightwings. So the Watcher is traveling with Avluva, who's one of these Flyers, and the other member of his party is this other guildless individual called, or he was a changeling, who are basically, again, genetically modified humans who have sort of been outcast because some of the decisions they've made in the past. So they've been sort of ostracized and outcast, so they can't form guilds, because being in a guild actually gives you some privileges when you're traveling, etc. So being guildless is not something that you wanted to be in this future world. So what we find is that Earth, during that second cycle where they were at their peak, made some pretty stupid decisions, some pretty arrogant decisions that ultimately led to the downfall. So when the party finally gets to Rome, they meet up with the Emperor of Rome, or Rome, and things sort of take a bit of a weird twist where the Emperor, in his arrogance, in his power, decides to take the Nightwing under his care, if you know what I mean. And this sort of upsets the Changeling, because the Changeling sort of really had feelings for Avloa, as does the Watcher himself. But the Watcher is sort of a bit conflicted and confused. He has this sort of fatherly affection towards Avloa, the Flyer, but it's also verging on the side of some really inappropriate conduct for a man who's well into his prime. So, it doesn't quite say what age he is, but it refers to him as being weathered and quite old. So I suspect he was probably 60 or 70 years old. So that relationship is a bit weird, but it sort of works out in the end, and it sort of makes sense. And so what happens is that this changeling is actually not who he appears to be. And as the watcher decides to do his daily chore of looking for these alien invaders, actually notices that something's amiss. This is not looking like the way it normally goes when I do my watch. And he raises the alarm because the invaders are on their way. So the invaders get there. There's a couple of little plots and twists that happen during that first part of the book, the actual novella, which I don't want to talk to, because even though it's not a real spoiler in the overall novel, I think it sort of takes away from some of those, independent novellas, right? That's the thing about these stitch-up novels, where you can't talk to the whole plot without giving some spoilers away, because the spoilers can be further the way through the book, and you think, oh, well, I wasn't expecting that to happen. And that's, I think, a consequence of these stitch-up novels. So I'll leave that first part being the way it is, where these party end up in Rome. There's a bit of conflict with the emperor. There's a bit of conflict with the emperor and the flyer of Luva, which causes some major conflict with the changeling, and things sort of end up with the Watchers and the emperor of Rome in exile. So the second part of the novel has the Watcher separated from his party, but then traveling with the Emperor of Rome, who's gone through his own challenges and difficulties, right? No spoilers. I'll try at least my best to minimize spoilers in this one. So he's traveling along with the Emperor, and he has to change guilds now, because his profession as a Watcher is now obsolete. The invaders have come. They're now rulers of the world. So there's not much point him doing his watching anymore. So he decides to join this guild of rememberers. And these rememberers are basically historians, for the lack of better words. They're basically doing a study of, the world's history and trying to maintain that linguistic and oral tradition of keeping Earth's history alive. So he decides to join this guild of rememberers, and is finally given sponsorship by this woman in the guild. And the Roman emperor, being who he was, stuffs things up again, basically, right? So he gets into some kind of conflict with this the person that sponsored him in the first place, who was already married. And a whole lot of stuff happens there again that I don't want to talk to again, which would be a spoiler for Paris Way. So yeah, needless to say, the Roman emperor does some stupid things, basically gets the Watcher and himself into a whole lot of water, one more so than the other. And the Watcher is then set off again on the road to Jerusalem, to basically make amends, right? So because he's had to make a couple of pretty serious, decisions and some pretty serious consequences to sort of help the emperor. And he's almost had to turn his back on humanity. And in doing that, he finds himself completely conflicted, and he feels that the only way to reconcile and to amend his sins is to go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem with his sponsor, the woman who sponsored him into the Remembrance Guild, to get basically renewed and redeemed, right? So the third part of the book, The Road to Jerusalem, really deals with the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and really where the book shines, because it's really a story about, sin and absolution of sin, and of hope and redemption, right? Which is really what the third chapter really talks about. So look, a stitch-up novel. I first read Nightwings, it would have been about 20 years ago. And honestly, I didn't know at the time that it was a stitch-up novel. So when it comes to stitch-up novels, I think this one reads quite well. I thought the three separate stories ran together quite well. So for that, I would say that it's a wonderful stitch-up novel. I know some people are a bit steered away from stitch-up novels because they've had some bad experiences with them. But I would say that this one reads quite nicely. It's, I think, a wonderful novella. and I think a wonderful novel in its own right. So I've mentioned on this channel previously that I'm a huge Robert Silverberg fan. I don't think I've ever read a Silverberg book that I haven't enjoyed, and this one is definitely no exception. I would say that in the scheme of things, I don't think it's Robert Silverberg's strongest work, but I still absolutely love the world building in this. I just love Robert Silverberg's style. I just love his world building and just little ideas that he brings up into his novel almost as a passing thought that I think, wow, what an awesome concept that is. And to illustrate that, there's one, so they have this network of computer systems, right? But these things are not powered by electronics. They're actually powered by human brains, right? So when people die, the brains are basically donated to this data bank, and they're all linked up, and it's almost like a 1969 version of the internet, right? Where, you know, you can ask this data bank a whole lot of questions, but it's processed by these organic brains of humans, all linked up together to be able to give you this very fast, you know, access to information. I mean, little things like that you think, wow, well, that's a pretty cool concept. I love that concept, right? And he does that throughout the novel, and he does that throughout all his novels, where he has this sort of side note, almost a little cookie almost, that in itself is a wonderful dessert, if you like. So yeah, I absolutely love Robert Silverberg's writing. I think he did a really wonderful job with the guilds. I did like the idea of the guilds, and people being guildless, and how humanity had to come together to really, you know, not only atone for their past sins, but to also bring these invaders on along the journey and to redeem the whole of humanity and become one race, one humanity, right? And it just, I love the world building in the book. I think it's a wonderful bit of world building. And I think, like I said, I do like the fact that for a stitch-up novel, I think it reads wonderfully. I enjoyed all three sections of the book, and I highly recommend it. So is there anything I didn't like in the novel? Look, it's not really. I do like the novel. I would say that the relationship that the Watcher had with the Flyer of Luva was a bit weird at the beginning of the book. I think it just came across a bit creepy, to be honest, right? I just thought, almost borderline, yeah, this is not right. Like, we shouldn't be going here with this relationship. But it's sort of, which was sort of weird, right? It was almost like he had this fatherly love for this young Flyer, but he also had some feelings of lust and love, and it was just really weird, right? I just found it, I found it borderline offensive, not offensive, but it wasn't very palatable, let's say, right? But towards the end, when he goes to rejuvenate himself and a whole lot of stuff gets sorted out, and I think, okay, look, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, Mr. Silverberg. But look, that was only sort of minor criticism I could point out in the novel. But overall, I really enjoyed it. So when it comes to recommendations, on this channel, I've reviewed This Immortal by Roger Zelazny in the past, which is actually on our Hugo and Nebula award-winning ladder that we got going on this channel. So I think if you read that book and then you enjoy that book, this is in a sort of similar vein, not so much in the Greek mythology part, but, you know, we're talking about a dystopian, almost a dystopian future world where man has surpassed his peak, and they're struggling trying to find themselves. They've got some alien overlords that are sort of, you know, trying to dictate terms and make amends for some of their wrongdoings in the past. So I think it's got a lot of similarities to Roger Zelazny's This Immortal. So I think if you enjoyed that book, you will enjoy Nightwings. I don't think it would be a stretch to say. So when it comes to Robert Silverberg, there are quite a few Robert Silverberg books that I've enjoyed over the years. This is one of them. I wouldn't say it's quite up there as one of the best of Robert Silverberg books. So maybe one of these days I'll do a video of some of my favorite Robert Silverberg books. But I still highly recommend this for first sci-fi readers. And if you're a fantasy reader, I think there are elements of fantasy in this novel that you will enjoy as well. But yeah, I don't know if it will be the first and foremost Robert Silverberg book I recommend, but surely one of his best, I think, fix-up novels that there is. And talking about recommended fix-up novels now, so I wanted to go through a couple that I've got here from my list of that I've picked up off my shelf here. And we'll go through them really quickly, right? So one of them, another classic, and some of these you may be familiar with as fix-up novels. Some might come a bit of a surprise. But Theodore Sturgeon's More Than Human, that's a fix-up novel. And there was 3 or 4 in here of short stories that were stitched together. One of them was like this, what was it called? The Fabulous Idiot, Baby's Free, and there's several others in there as well. So Theodore Sturgeon, a good book. I really enjoyed reading Theodore Sturgeon's More Than Human. The other one which we reviewed on this channel and it's ranking really, really well on the Sci-Fi Shed ladder, and some of you may be surprised to know is a fix-up novel, is Philip Jose Farmer's To Your Scattered Bodies Go. One of my all-time favorite novels, a fix-up novel. You would never know by reading it. One of our all-time favorite novels, fix-up novel. This one here, E. Doc Smith's classic Lensman series, Triplanetary, the first novel. This is a fix-up novel, and it reads like a fix-up novel, right? I just recently read this book, actually. I haven't done a review. If you're interested in a full review of Triplanetary, drop me a note, and I'll get around to it. I have just recently reread it. But this is, again, one of those fix-up novels, and it full-on reads like a fix-up novel. The other fix-up novel on the list is Robert Silverberg again, in The World Inside. So another fix-up novel. And this one I think actually reads better than Nightwings, and is also one of my favorite Robert Silverberg books. The premise here is that Earth is in somewhere in the distant future. There's millions of people on Earth, and they built these huge, massive buildings where each individual building hosts something like 800,000 souls. But there's a bit of conflict there. People want to go back to grassroots and go back to the sunshine, right? Because these buildings are self-contained cities and worlds in themselves almost. Great, great novel, a Robert Silverberg classic, also a fix-up novel. And lastly, A. Van Vogt, the man himself, who coined the words and the Silkies, which I haven't read for many years now, but is next on my TBR. So if you want to get a review of this book, I highly recommend you drop me a note, let me know, say, hey Pete, really interested in your opinion on the Silky, and I plan to read it, and I'm happy to provide a review. So hey, something a little bit different. Fix-up novels, are they worth to read? I think they are. And honestly, some of the ones that I've even called out today, you would not know that they are previously released short stories that have been fixed up together to form a new novella or a new book. And I think some of them, like Philip Jose Farmer's To Your Scattered Bodies Go, for me, are classic of sci-fi novels. And if you have that sort of mentality that says, fix-up novel, haven't really had much success with them, don't know if I'll ever read one ever again. I hope this review has sort of swayed you a bit, because there are some pearls out there, some really, really great books. Hey, this has been Peter. This has been the Sci-Fi Shed, and I'm looking forward to doing a really good reviews. I'm currently reading 2 good books at the moment that are on the Hugo and Nebula Award reading ladder. So back to regular programming in the next couple of videos, and I hope you join me next time in the shed.